Hello and thanks for joining us on your channel of choice, Africa Independent Television AIT, and welcome to a brand new year 2023. And thanks for your loyalty to this signature show. I'm always excited to welcome you to the program, which promises more milestones, more issues of importance to our polity, and more exciting conversations. My name is Nwabuozi Njoku. Now, in this program, this edition of the program this Sunday, Godwin Emefiele, Central Bank Governor, and the jurisprudence of Naira redesign and withdrawal limits. IGUEBEN train station attack. Was it a predictable incident? Independent National Electoral Commission extends deadline for collection of voter cards. Imo State House Speaker Emeka Nduka presides over legislative endorsement of corruption, underdevelopment, and dwarfing of democracy in Imo State. Plus, thank you, a full New Year package, if you ask me, to welcome you into 2023. Please stay with us. Now, we begin this first edition in 2023 with the special sitting of the Imo State House of Assembly on Wednesday, January the 11th. The Speaker was attired in his full Speaker regalia, wielding his legislative authority as he guided the House to vote against a constitutional amendment which sought to give financial autonomy to the state legislatures, judiciaries, and local governments. Now, the Imo State House of Assembly voted to be receiving handouts anytime they raised vouchers from the state government. By that inglorious decision, Imo State House of Assembly nailed the legislature, the entire judiciary, and all local governments in Imo State to the whim of the state governor. Now, just in case Emeka Nduka and the other House members do not know, let me translate to them what their vote of shame amounts to. It means that the growth of the legislature in Imo State, training for the legislators on processes and procedures, constituency relationships and accountability processes, bottom to top budgeting as instrument of constituency development, recruitment of technical staff for meaningful legislature work, independence of the legislature as a necessary condition for effective legislative checks on the executive excesses and on accountability are all to be determined at the whim of the governor. In summary, Imo people have only one ruler, the governor. That same vote has not only subordinated but subsumed the judiciary on the executive function, because a dependent judiciary can hardly go against the fingers that feed it. Judgment may as well be written in the government house. As for the local governments, there is now a legislative stamp on their function as wage officers for raising salary vouchers. They cannot develop local markets, they cannot run primary schools and health centers, and they cannot grade even community roads without the permission of the state government. The governor keeps all the money and gives out as he pleases him. Hooray! Imo State House of Assembly, and congratulations, Emeka Nduka. History will never forget those who underdeveloped Imo State. Well, thank you, Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, for two steps you took last week to rekindle public confidence on the commission. The first was the announcement by the chairman of the commission that there was no postponement and there cannot be a postponement to the 2023 election as already scheduled by the commission. Thank you, sir. Now, the second was the extension of deadline for the collection of permanent voter cards to January the 29th. Both actions put a fresh breath and buoyed the confidence of many Nigerians in INEC. But for goodness sake, Who is this Abdullahi Zuru, chairman of the board of the Electoral Institute, who spoke for INEC chairman last Monday? This Zuru did not speak off the cuff, but from a written speech. Was any interest group testing the waters? From experience, the president pushed back, which warranted the INEC chairman to swear by the Quran that the election timetable is sacrosanct. May not be enough. They say eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. This push must be unending until elections are over. This is the signature show on AIT, and this Sunday, our new segment, Clear Look, makes a grand entry. And in this maiden outing, we look at the central bank governor, Godwin Emefiele, his CBN, and the jurisprudence of Naira redesign and withdrawal limits. Please stay with us. Well, while we were away on holiday, a raging controversies gripped the nation over a move by the Department of State Services to arrest the central bank governor, Godwin Emefiele. DSS had sought court authority to arrest the CBN governor, a request the court declined. Now, DSS had accused Emefiele of terrorism financing. Before this, however, Emefiele had stirred controversy when he suddenly announced a redesign of 200, 500, and 1,000 naira, 1,000 denominations of the naira, explaining that as much as 80% of the currencies in use are not within the financial system. A way of saying that individuals were hoarding the currencies. He quickly followed this with time frame within which old notes will cease to be legal tender, and the limit of cash withdrawals by individuals and corporate bodies. Now, politicians went up in arms against Emefiele. Groups sprang from nowhere demanding his resignation or outright sack by the president. The Minister of Finance, who is representing on the board of the central bank, denied knowledge of the new policy. And the National Assembly summoned Emefiele. He bluffed the lawmakers and accompanied the president to Washington, D.C. in the U.S. President Muhammadu Buhari has since defended the embattled central bank governor, telling Nigeria that the governor obtained his permission before he put up the new policies. But does the permission resolve all the issues? Does the central bank governor's report to the president put away all his accountability obligations and policy initiatives and decisions? Or is Emefiele simply being clever by half, trying to take advantage of a section of the Central Bank Act to escape being accountable in the application of his powers? This is the issue we raise on Closer Look as we examine Emefiele, Central Bank, and the jurisprudence of Naira redesign. Stay with us. The Central Bank Act number 7 of 2007 states in Section 1, subsection 3, that in order to facilitate the achievement of its mandate under this Act, and in line with the objectives of promoting stability and continuity in economic management, the bank shall be an independent body in the discharge of its functions. Section 2 of the Act states that the principal objectives of the bank shall be to, among other functions, ensure monetary and price stability, issue legal tender currency in Nigeria. These sections provide legal basis for the controversial new Naira notes which the Central Bank of Nigeria has issued and the cash withdrawal limits which it has introduced. Section 6 of the Act provides for the establishment of a board for the Central Bank of Nigeria, and subsection 2 of that section 6 enumerates the composition of the board to include the governor of the Central Bank as chairman, 4 deputy governors, the permanent secretary, Federal Ministry of Finance, 5 directors, and the accountant general of the Federation. The board is the organ through which the central bank makes critical policy decisions and discharges weighty functions. By the composition of the board and its responsibilities, the federal government, through the Federal Minister of Finance, which is represented on the board by the Permanent Secretary and the Accountant General of the Federation, has foreknowledge of policy initiatives such as the redesign of the new Naira notes and the withdrawal limits. On Friday, the 28th of October 2022, however, the Minister of Finance, Zainab Ahmed, denied any knowledge of the policy to redesign the 200 Naira, 500 and 1,000 denominations of the Naira. She said that the bank, which had the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry on its board, did not hint the Ministry of the policy.
We were not consulted. It was an announcement that we heard. And I've seen,
you too, you just saw the press release like every other party.
Part of the reasons that was advocated is that's one of the ways to mop up liquidity to manage inflation.
Similarly, Central Bank Deputy Governor in charge of Financial System Stability, Aisha Ahmed, told the National Assembly that the Central Bank of Nigeria ordered for 500 million units of the new Naira notes, but she had no knowledge of the actual quantity printed. She was representing the CBN governor who had been summoned by the House of Representatives.
Okay, how much was printed? I'm sorry, I'm not able to share that figure now only because I want to give an accurate number.
And it took the summoning of the Central Bank Governor Godwin Emefiele by the House of Representatives for the bank to provide information to the legislature on the critical policy of redesigning the Naira notes and imposing cash withdrawal limits for both individuals and organizations.
We are spending hard-earned money to print the Naira. We cannot keep printing the Naira. So as much as we have doubled down on this policy right now, we want you to tell us categorically for how long will this be?
The statutory duties wasn't optional, obligatory of the CBN under Section 8 of the CBN Act to brief this House on your monetary policies.
Section 8 of the CBN Act makes two critical provisions in subsection 4A and B and subsection 5A and B. These sections provide that the governor of the central bank shall appear before the National Assembly on semi-annual hearings regarding efforts, activities, objectives, and plans of the board with monetary policy and economic development and proposal for the future. Section 5 provides that the bank shall, from time to time, keep the president informed of the affairs of the bank and make a formal report and presentation on activities of the bank to the relevant committees of the National Assembly. Was the Naira design a flight of fancy, fire brigade action, unplanned, ill-thought out, and undigested, and therefore the bank could not meet these provisions of the law?
Section 845 actually makes it mandatory for the CBN governor to appear twice before the House yearly. And in this instance now, Emefiele have been invited once or twice, and to the best of my knowledge, he didn't appear before the House. We all know that the National Assembly has oversight function when it comes to some of these things. But to the best of my knowledge, he did not appear. But I think he sent representatives. And if he has sent a representative, I think the CBN has 4 deputy governors. He mustn't be the one to go before the House. He can as well delegate any of the governors because they work as a team. And if he has done that, I don't think he has fouled the provision of that act.
Central Bank Act of 2007 gives the CBN wide powers, as far as monetary policies are concerned. because if you look at sections 18, 19, and 20 of the CBN Act 2007, you will see that it empowers the governor, the central bank, to redesign, reissue currencies, and on the approval of the president, but by the recommendation of the board. So first of all, the board has to make that recommendation to the president, who will give his approval. And that is what the act says. The act actually, does not, how will I put it? The act does not give any other agency or authority approval for such actions. Where in some other thing about, like for example, briefing in National Assembly is briefing. When the law says you should brief somebody, it's actually like saying, okay, this is what you should do. But it does not, there's no sanction or there is no condition that if you don't brief that body, then you cannot do that act.
Godwin Emefiele, the governor of Central Bank, has brushed aside the objections raised by the Minister of Finance that the ministry was not carried along, which raises issues on whether the CBN board actually discussed the policy. He has also bluffed the National Assembly, insinuating that he is responsible only to the president. President Muhammadu Buhari has since defended the CBN governor, saying that he wrote for and obtained the approval of the president before the new Naira policy was implemented. However, it seems the independence of the Central Bank of Nigeria, as provided by Section 1, Subsection 3 of the CBN Act 2007, and the governor's reporting to the president are circumscribed by other provisions which make the bank also accountable to the legislature and to take the Minister of Finance and Accountant General of the Federation along in its policy initiatives. If the central bank governor did not discharge these responsibilities to those other stakeholders as provided by the law, would his excuse that the bank was working to bring all money in circulation into the banking system suffice? Does his excuse tell the whole story? Or is there a place for those who accuse Emefiele of playing politics and attempting to cover something?
For such a policy, with fundamental ramifications for the economy, that a person like the Minister of Finance said she was not aware. Now, the Central Bank Act makes the permanent secretary a statutory member of that board, which means that if indeed the board sat, the permanent secretary is supposed to brief the minister. So, which means that from all indications, if the minister says he's not aware, it means the permanent secretary is not aware, and it also means the board did not sit. That is what it means. I'm not too sure of that, but that is what one can deduce. And if that is the case, the approval of the president, do you understand, is actually null and void, because you cannot put something on nothing and expect it to stand. If the board did not meet, and it was Emefiele who went to seek approval, Emefiele is not the board. So that actually clothes these present actions of the CBN with illegality, because the mere approval of the president will not suffice. There are procedures. The procedure, and the major one, is that the board must recommend to the president. And the board can only recommend if the board sits and takes that decision. It is discussed and takes that decision. So there are certain things we don't know about these things. And that is why a lot of people are reading so many meanings into what is happening now. Because for somebody of that stature, is a member of the government. The Minister of Finance is a prominent person in the government. And you are going to take a decision that will have monetary and fiscal policy, effects. And yet, you don't even, that the minister is coming out openly. That means that there is a dislink in the system, in governance, for such a thing. That statement alone, is enough to create doubts about the intentions of the CBN.
These questions arise following allegations that through the Ways and Means instrument, the central bank governor, Godwin Emefiele, may have either misapplied or abused his position and is using the Naira redesign for other ends than economic and monetary control. We made an effort to reach the central bank on these issues. The bank promised to get back to us, but they did not. Next Sunday on this program, Emefiele, Buhari, and Ways and Means. Yet, while we were away, daredevil terrorist kidnappers stormed the IGUEBEN rail station in Edo State. Initial reports indicated that 32 people were kidnapped. The state government has since corrected the figures to about 20. And security operatives are making efforts to rescue the kidnapped passengers. But was the IGUEBEN train station terror attack and kidnap predictable? Did the Nigerian Railway Corporation and Nigeria security community show that they learned lessons from the Kaduna-Abuja train terrorist attack? Is the Nigeria police still a colonial relic or a security agency growing and inventing itself its own strategies from its everyday experience? These are the issues we interrogate in our conversation this Sunday. Please stay with us. Hello, a happy new year, and let me welcome you to a brand new 2023. I hope that this election year will be a beautiful one for all of us. Of course, my name has not changed because the year has changed. My name remains Nwabuozenjok. Let me welcome you to the conversation segment of the Signature Show this Sunday. Now, you will recall that about 10, 12 days ago, or let us say 2 weeks ago, there was an incident in the IGUEBEN railway station in Edo State, in which the authorities have confirmed that 31 people were kidnapped. As at the last report, it's alleged, claimed that 6 of those persons have been rescued, and the security operatives are combing the bushes to try to locate where these people are being kept, and 2 suspects have been arrested. That's some good news. But this Sunday, we're going to look at the import of that IGUEBEN railway station kidnap. And I have with me this afternoon Kabiru Adamu. Kabiru Adamu is the managing director of Beacon Consulting and enterprise security risk management and intelligence expert. Kabir, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Chief. It's my pleasure.
Kabir, I'm sure you heard my introduction. When you heard of that kidnap, that raid at that train station in Edo State, what came to your mind?
In all sincerity, not again. And this is on the backdrop of the incident that happened in March 2020, when a similar train infrastructure, this time around the rail line, was attacked by gunmen, and at the end of it, about 8 persons in the immediate period of that attack died, and then we had 2 others may have died after the incident. And then, of course, about over 60 persons were abducted, for whom at least for each of them about 100 million plus was paid as ransom. And then we had the then Minister of Transportation, and then the person who succeeded him, making assurances to us as Nigerians that never again in the history of the country will such incidents occur. In fact, not only that, huge sums of money were invested in providing what to them was adequate security to ensure that there is no reoccurrence. More importantly, the rail service, at least on that particular route, was suspended, and it was worrisome for some of us, because loans were collected for which rail infrastructure was bought and projects implemented, So if you suspend operations, the question is, how are you paying for that loan that was collected? So these were the kind of thoughts going through my head. And then, of course, that incident occurred. We are a few weeks before the elections. The location where this incident occurred in the south, in a state that is keenly contested between the two political juggernauts, as it were, in that region. So again, apart from this terroristic component that I have just described and the economic component, that political component also came to my mind. On the whole, what impact would it have on the socio-economic and socio-political circumstances within the state? The immediate response of especially the media was that it was by herdsmen. The police issued a statement. The police did not attribute it to any particular group. They said it was gunmen. As at today, I'm not aware that any group has, quote unquote, claimed responsibility for the incident. So these were the kind of thoughts going to my head. But you can summarize it to say the immediate response was not again.
Now, Kabir, the president has kept saying that he will hand over a secure nation. An incident of the type you described happened along the Kaduna-Abuja rail corridor. For me, it appeared a novel method of crime, and therefore, I could excuse that our security operatives, our security institutions were taken by surprise. When such surprise happens, what ought to be the reaction of the security and intelligence community?
From my standpoint as an operator, even though I'm in the industrial, or what you would like to describe as the private space, it wasn't a surprise. There are key components that would make it not surprising to us. Number one, the terroristic groups, especially the ones operating in the northeast, they have demonstrated enough capability to show us that they have targeted infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, as well as other infrastructure. And I'll give you some examples. The bridges in the northeast were targeted, road networks were targeted, telecommunication infrastructure was targeted, markets were targeted. So they have demonstrated enough capability to have showed us that they were capable of attracting public infrastructure. Now, with specific reference to the rail line, there was enough evidence to show that they had conducted surveillance, especially at terminals and stations. And now, given the vulnerability of the rail lines, if you have traveled on that rail line, you would realize that the moment you pass probably Kubwa, up until you reach some of the major towns, you are in the middle of nowhere. From your, as it were, south, and from your northern part, or even east-west, as you did, whatever direction you decide to take, you are in open space. And this is savanna land with shrubs that provides cover. In certain areas, you would even, the rail line goes through rocks. And then, of course, even bigger trees along the route, which would have provided cover. So daytime, vulnerable, but more significantly, nighttime, increased vulnerability, which would have showed to any right-thinking security professional. Because first off, you did identify and evaluate the capability of your opponent, and then you put in place requisite mitigation measures. Now, what would be requisite mitigation measure? These are 4 layers of security. Number one, the ability to detect the enemy. In this instance, it's an open space. So if you install high resonance cameras or CCTVs, they should be able to, or even resonance signals to detect movement. Whatever, there are different technologies out there that would help you in identifying either visual or audio signals. Now, so number one, the ability to detect a would-be enemy. Number two, the ability to deny that would-be enemy from getting access to that infrastructure, be it the rail line, the rail station, or even the train itself. Number three, the ability to delay that perpetrator So let's say he comes with superior force than you anticipated, and he's still able to beat the detection and the denial. So how do you delay him? And that means whatever infrastructure you have in place should be able to prevent him access to that particular target that he wants. Now, during that period when you are delaying him, that is where the last component comes into place, reinforcement or response. And the easiest way to do that is communication plus mobility. Now, I have looked at the railway system, and I am saying this with all sense of responsibility. I have conducted assessments of that infrastructure, and I can tell you these 4 layers are missing, even as at today. So when the minister reassured us that he was going to resume transportation, I reached out through means that I knew would reach him and say, your Honorable Minister, with due respect, give me an audience. Let's discuss what to me would be a good and adequate security posture in the manner that I've described. Now, I've given you the broad overview. All of these four components that I've mentioned have under them subheads that during discussions I will reveal to him. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. So I'm going back to your point. We weren't surprised, we the experts. The vulnerabilities are there, and any determined perpetrator, enemy, actor can exploit those vulnerabilities. Now, the second part of my statement would be what capacity does the minister have to support him? Because he is a minister. I expect him to be a manager. I don't expect him to be a technical person with all the knowledge that is required in the different fields. And I've asked myself, and the Railway Corporation, as an example, has police component, I think a commissioner of police, and then the DSS too is deployed in the Railway Corporation. So that brings me to the next point. We need to interrogate the capacity of our institutions in terms of their ability to carry out certain responsibilities. Do we just deploy a commissioner of police? What kind of training does that commissioner of police have? Is he, over the period of his service in the police, has he acquired enough technical knowledge to support an infrastructure at the railway, or is he appointed on the basis of certain other considerations? Likewise, the DSS person that was deployed there. And even if, for instance, they are, and they all have this technical knowledge, how well have they been subsumed into the mainstream functions of the ministry to allow them to play their role?
I want to look at it as a bigger issue. I do not even want to just narrow it down to the railway. I'm just using this incident, for us to converse on something that bothers me. An incident of the Kaduna-Abuja rail happened. Is it not, will I be expecting too much of our security community to use that incident to begin to paint possible scenarios? This took us by surprise, yes. It's a novel approach, yes. No matter that these terrorists have been operating in that zone, but this kind of bombing a major infrastructure and kidnapping en masse, now using them to negotiate ransom, novel. Will I be expecting too much that the security community, the intelligence community, should call themselves back to the boardroom and say, look, this has happened. What are the other likely scenarios that could emerge, and begin to identify security underbelly, and therefore say, look, it could happen here, it could happen here. This is likely way it could happen, and then advise the national security advisor and say, look, there is a major national challenge. Would I be expecting too much?
Not at all. In fact, every good security system arrangement should have that type of capability. A war room-like situation where you sit your generals within the context of the war room, sit them down, and then start ask them to build scenarios. Now, what type of scenarios are they going to build for you? 3 major scenarios. Best case outcome, the best case outcome in this instance would be criminal in nature. They just carried out the incidents expecting financial benefit. Now that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that it's an internationally organized terrorist movement. So put your generals in the war room, call it, I am calling it war room, but it could be DSS, it could be the National Security Advisor, it could be any of the other arms of government or the intelligence agencies. Sit down in that war room, build those scenarios, and then more importantly, anticipate the outcome of each of the scenarios, and then what capabilities do you have internally as a country, individually and as a community, to counter the outcome of each scenario. So that means, as an example, beyond just singling out Abuja-Kaduna rail line, the several other networks within the country, they would now identify their vulnerabilities, build similar scenarios, ask themselves capabilities in terms of their ability to prevent those type of attacks. Now, what that would do is, at the end of this war-like scenario that I've described, you'll be able to answer, do we have enough capability to prevent these things from occurring in the future? If the truthful answer is no, where do we acquire that capability? Can we do it homegrown, or do we need to go out to our allies across the world to acquire that capability? And then take that outcome of this war-like situation, war room-like situation, take it as a document, including the graphs, including the maps that you've developed, including the strategies that you developed, and take it to Mr. President, who is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. Take it to him and then get his approval to implement the strategy that you have developed. And that is what normal countries do. In our instance, I don't think that was done, because till date, and I say this with all sense of responsibility, we have not been told which group carried out that attack on the Abuja-Kaduna rail line. So we don't know the group. By we, I mean the general public. In spite of the fact that a group of concerned persons assisted the Minister of Defense the Chief of Defense Staff in helping achieve the relief of the victims. Now, that group, I'm aware, engaged with the leader of that particular group, but for some reasons the identity of that leader was kept away from the public, and that is not how you manage either terrorist or crime situations in the country. You don't, quote and unquote, hide the perpetrator. You say it out there. More importantly, you take action to show would-be terrorists or would-be gang leaders or criminals that crime or terrorism does not pay. In this instance, that person has been able to collect hundreds of millions, and as far as the public is concerned, nothing has been done to him. So what stops the next person from picking up the gun and doing the same thing that that person has done?
You know why I raise this question? Because to me, the IGUEBEN station incident seems to be either incompetence, lack of capacity, or outright failure on the part of our intelligence community. Now, if it is a failure, how can the president redeem his promise of handing over a secure country when the institutions are failing?
Thank you. First off, my response would not just be to Mr. President, but to the incoming administration, because hopefully, post-May 2023, we're going to have a new president. So this advice is not just going to Mr. President, but to that president that will take over from him. Accountability. We need to hold the leaders of our security agencies to account. That is the only way to correct these malaise and malfeasance that we're seeing within the security sector. Irrespective of the circumstances that happened in IGUEBEN and that happened in Kuje, that led to the Kuje prison attack, that happened along Abuja-Kaduna rail line when the Abuja-Kaduna train was attacked. Persons who were supposed to implement security within those corridors that allowed those incidents to happen should be held to account, so that whoever comes after them knows that if he drops the ball and allows such things to happen, he or she would also be held to account. Right now, of all these three incidents, including the Ondo church attack, not a single person, either at the state or at the federal level, has been held accountable. Now, it's easy for me to sit back and blame President Buhari, but what of the governors? In all of these incidents, let's remove Abuja, because Abuja does not have a governor, but let's go to Ondo State, where Amotekun exists. The governor appointed them, and they do have presence where that incident happened. Let's go to Kaduna, Kaduna has vigilante state-level security infrastructure in that location where the incident happened. The ordinary response would be they are not armed, they don't have guns, but at least they have the capacity for intelligence. So my point is that whoever has such responsibility should be held to account. That is the only way the next person to take up that responsibility would also sit up, knowing that if he doesn't do his job, he will be held to account. So again, whether it is incompetence, whether it is negligence, or whether it is even collusion, whoever is in charge of those places should be held to account. There is a commissioner of, or maybe special advisor on security in Edo State. At the local government level, there is someone responsible for security. And then at the federal level, there are several federal institutions that have been deployed and for whom we're paying taxpayers' money to ensure all of these levels need to be held to account.
Kabiru, let me just raise one matter of concern. Some top military brass have kept complaining that their formations, their ranks, have been infiltrated by the enemy. Let me use that planned word, enemy. In this circumstance, you're not even sure with whom you are going to this battle. Whether it is the real perpetrator that you are taking along to go and catch himself, or friendly folks. In this dilemma, Kabir, what can these institutions do to redeem themselves? Because it's a serious problem.
The solution is in background checks and vetting. This is what all countries of the world do. There are certain departments in government where you institute background checks and vetting more strenuously than you would do in other locations. So to give you an example, all the armed forces, the 3 or 4 of them, all the intelligence organizations, the CBN and several other critical components of our economy, you can do it broadly. For certain organizations like the CBN, I wouldn't exclude anyone. The military, I wouldn't exclude anyone. The armed forces generally, I wouldn't include anyone. But in certain organizations, you can leave it to maybe when somebody reaches management level or in certain critical departments. So background check before the person is employed, and a critical one, not one that is based on sentiment, that identifies who the person is. In today's world, they go back to something as basic as the social media platforms that the person maintains. So look at his Facebook postings, his Twitter or her Twitter postings, and see what direction those postings are. If there is a red flag, that person is not going to be employed in that location. So that is at the beginning, the pre-employment background check.
Let us look at this. Suppose the big boss is the compromised folk.
So what
does the institution do?
The next thing I was going to talk about is vetting. Now, we've done pre-employment background check. We've ensured that the person coming in is clean. Now, the next one to be done is vetting. Now, vetting can be done periodically, depending on the criticality of the organization to our national security or national economy, as the case may be. If it's critical, we do it after every 6 months. If it's less critical, we do it in 2-year periods. Now, these things are expensive, but they must be done. They must be done. So, to answer your question, for top-level employees, such as top management, it's not done in-house. It's done by the security organizations. So, as an example, the DSS will conduct a component. If that organization, especially an organization that has senior management that has operations outside the country, it can be done by a combination of both the SSS, the NIA, and the DIA. Now, the irony is this: we're actually doing that. But are we doing it meritoriously? Unfortunately, no. And I can give you several examples over time where it's been proven that we are not doing it meritoriously. Other considerations are put, and that is where our National Assembly needs to come in. We're operating a democracy. There where the various arms of government check themselves. So all of these organizations that we're discussing are under the executive arm. Now the parliament needs to strengthen its capacity to oversight these organizations. So where, for instance, the DSS and the NIA fail to carry out their responsibilities, it is the role of the various committees within the National Assembly that oversights them. And it's very easy. They come to them every year for budgetary considerations. If you are not doing what you are supposed to do as mandated by the Constitution, we ask you critical questions. We are giving you money to do it, but you are not doing it. So again, I am reluctant to apportion this blame to Mr. President alone. Yes,
I'm not apportioning blame because he is the person making the promise. I'm sympathizing with him because if he makes these promises and the institution that ought to deliver are failing, the same thing as his own promise also failing. Now, shouldn't he show more than a passing interest in these matters?
Now, this is why in my opening remarks to your question, I said this is not just to Mr. President, it is also to the incoming president. There are certain things that we need to do. We need to look at the capacity of our institutions. Each and every one of them, we need to look at those capacities. Why are they failing to meet the obligations for which we have given them responsibility for? It's simply because the lack of capacity and the element of accountability. So we need to look at that squarely. How do we introduce monitoring and evaluation measures within the civil service or the public service as a whole? And this is quite important. In modern world, M&E components, monitoring and evaluation components, are quite critical in the management of any organization. So we need to look at closely. Now, what we've done in Nigeria, we have departments called M&E, monitoring and evaluation. Well, how functional are they? By being functional, how much of the key performance indicators have these departments developed that we now can tie into the operations of that organization? Now, because I've been privileged to work during ministerial reviews, I know that there is a lot of, what would I even call it now? Fraud, for lack of a better word, within the development of these KPIs. So as an example, you can jog 100 kilometers every morning. Then you now give yourself the scorecard of saying you will jog 30 kilometers every day, knowing very well that you can jog 100 kilometers. So when I'm evaluating you, you've jogged your 30 kilometers, knowing very well that you needed to jog 100 kilometers. I'm going to score you how much? Over 100 actually, if you jog more than that 30 kilometers. So we need to develop realistic KPIs. So if we pick the security sector that we're discussing, in developing their KPIs, if fuel or oil theft is, let's say, how many million barrels per day? Let's give it, let's say 2 million barrels per day. That KPI should be put at, let's say, 2.5 million. Because for God's sake, if we put it at 200,000 barrels per day, who is going to do the remaining 1.8 million? That particular government department or government departments that have been given that responsibility, we need to now measure the level of challenge. If the level of challenge is, let's say, 200 million, we should increase it to 2.5 million and apportion it among themselves. So when you are doing your own computation, you should know that you are addressing 35% of that challenge if you are 3 within that sector. So that by the time the other person does 35, the other person does 35, we'll be able to measure it. And that is KPIs that are functional and efficient. If the M&E functions and the KPIs fall short of the expectations that would lead to me and you seeing the effect of the functions of those organizations, then we'll remain where we are. And I can tell you with all sense of responsibility, that is what is happening. We would assemble all of these persons. They will present scorecards to Mr. President showing that they have been able to achieve X, Y, Z. When the problem is that in developing their KPIs, they underscore themselves deliberately. So it's not that easy. It needs a technical reevaluation that would help in ensuring that the output is commensurate with the expectation of you and I as Nigerians.
Nigerian Railway Corporation, just my last word, Nigerian Railway Corporation has reassured that they are doing the right things to provide security. Are you comforted by that?
No, and every listener who has listened to how I explained the 4 layers of security, starting from detection up until response, will realize that they are not doing enough. For each of these layers, if you pick, you will find out that there are vulnerabilities that are allowing the enemy to exploit and to carry out their...
Can I just make a quick comment? There was something that trended in the social media toward the end of 2022, were on this very route, this Warri, Itakpe, IGUEBEN route. The train was stopping in its track to pick passengers and continue its journey, not on the railway station, along the track. Can you make a comment on that?
So again, those are vulnerabilities that could have been exploited by the enemy, and it's also a sign of the lack of capacity within the regulatory ministry, in this instance, Ministry of Transportation, as well as the Railway Corporation itself, whichever driver, I think that's what they are called, of the train, as well as the other administrative staff, because there is a manager, and I heard that he's also part of the persons that was abducted, that allowed that to happen, did it not in compliance with the policies and regulations of the Railway Corporation, and he should have been sanctioned, or she should have been sanctioned before that incident finally happened. So again, systematic and structural failures that have led us to where we are. If you conduct an audit, and from what I'm hearing, so many vulnerabilities, CCTVs in the train station not working, the fences broken, bush parts that should have been cleared, not cleared, so many things that could have allowed the enemy to exploit and carry out what he did, or what they did.
Well, in the past 30 minutes or so, I've been discussing with Kabiru Adamu. He's the managing director of Beacon Consulting and an enterprise security risk management and intelligence expert. The point in conversation has been the incident that happened at the IGUEBEN railway station, where about 31 persons are reported to have been kidnapped. But we used it as a peg to also look at the response of our intelligence community to issues like this. Is it just making the president look as if he makes promises which he cannot fulfill? Or assurances and reassurances that open us up to more kidnaps and all that? But we hope that somebody has listened, somebody has watched, somebody has taken note of the informed advice is given and the analysis. Kabil, thank you very much for coming to the conversation.
My pleasure, Chief.
It is first for the 2023. Of course, you know when it begins, it never ends. Let's meet next Sunday. Good afternoon. And now for our thank you. Now, the inauguration of the nation's centenary anniversary celebration took place on Monday, February the 4th. That was under Jonathan, with former head of state, General Abdulsalami Abubakar, presenting the centenary theme song titled "This Land," celebrating 100 years of Nigeria. The theme song, which was commissioned by the office of the then Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Anyimpai Osanyem, had been in the works for over 2 months, was subsequently performed by the notable Nigerian musicians led by Onyeka Owenu. One review hailed the song as hitting all the right notes, fantastic instrumentals, easy to memorize and sing along, and meaningful lyrics. This January, we sweep everything else aside with "This Land."
Of mine, Nigeria on my mind, born in diversity, blessed beyond compare. Ooh, through these 100 years, our struggles and through our fears, we're strong in our unity. Peace, our destiny. Here we are.
mine, this land of mine, Nigeria, on my mind, on my mind. I pledge to you my loyalty, my love, my ability.
Ooh, and as we celebrate ourselves, we shall dedicate
to serve a new Nigeria, for a better land for all. Here we are, standing tall through adversities. We are one. 100 years of unity, Nigeria. We will stand on the mountain, shout it in the valley. Nigeria has come along.
And that's our program for this Sunday. Corruption Tory is taking a deserved rest and be back subsequently. But please look out for our special documentary, 3 Winners, 1 Champion. For now, let's call it a day. I'm Wabuze Njoku. Good afternoon.